The case study entitled Ecoterrorism, Kill the Hummers describes an environmental group called the Earth Liberation Front, or ELF, that engages in various illegal actions meant to promote environmental protection. These actions include the following: sabotaging the biotechnology building at the University of Idaho, burning down the offices of the Superior Lumber Company in Glendale, Oregon, and setting fire to a luxury home going up in a subdivision of Longmont, Colorado. One important thing to notice about the actions taken by this group is that they are characterized as a kind of terrorism. Specifically, they are labeled as ecoterrorism. In this video, I will consider this label and what it tells us about the nature of the ELF's actions. The word terrorism is used regularly, but what exactly does it mean? In this module, we have focused on the ethics of civil disobedience. So, to start, let's compare civil disobedience with terrorism. These concepts are similar insofar as each refers to an illegal act and, more to the point, an illegal act done for the sake of some political cause. However, when we speak of terrorism, we are referring to a violent act, whereas civil disobedience can often be peaceful. For example, consider black civil rights protesters in the 1960s sitting at lunch counters reserved for only white people. This was an act of civil disobedience. The protesters intentionally broke the law in order to protest racial segregation. However, it could not be characterized as an act of terrorism since these protesters did not commit any acts of violence. Yet, even if we include the stipulation that terrorism involves a violent act done for the sake of some social or political cause, this still does not quite get to the heart of what terrorism is. To see why, notice that this definition would apply to a country fighting a defensive war against an unjust aggressor. A defensive war involves violent acts in support of the cause of defending one's country. Yet once again, this is not the sort of thing we have in mind when we label something terrorism. To help clarify this concept, I want to look at the definition of terrorism given by the philosopher C.A.J. Cody in a 1985 article entitled The Morality of Terrorism. Cody defines a terrorist act as the following: a political act ordinarily committed by an organized group which involves the intentional killing or other severe harming of non-combatants or the threat of the same, or intentional severe damage to the property of non-combatants, or again the threat of the same. There are a few elements of this definition that I want to highlight. First, terrorism is a political act. This means that terrorism is not violence done at random or because of some personal grudge that somebody is harboring. Rather, terrorism is done in order to further some cause or enact some kind of political change. The actions of the ELF would meet this criterion insofar as their actions were taken for the sake of the cause of environmentalism. Second, the violence that is done in an act of terror is carried out against the persons or property of non-combatants. By a non-combatant, we mean a person who has not been designated as an active participant in a violent conflict. For instance, in the context of a war, this would include civilians and medical personnel, whereas soldiers would be seen as combatants. In the case of the ELF, it would seem pretty clear that the actions they take are being directed against civilians. It would come as a surprise to the University of Idaho or the Superior Lumber Company if they were to be informed that they were combatants in some kind of violent conflict. Of course, it is possible that the members of the ELF themselves do not see it this way. Perhaps from their point of view, they see the biotechnology building or company offices as property of combatants doing harm to the environment. However, that would probably stretch the meaning of the term combatant a bit too far. Finally, this definition of terrorism requires that severe harm is done either to the person or property of the individuals being targeted. This requirement is important because it explains why we refer to acts like this as terrorism in the first place. To put the point plainly, terrorism functions by invoking terror. Oftentimes, the terrorist's primary concern is not necessarily the harm they cause to those they have directly targeted. Rather, the real point is the widespread effect that this action will have on other people. By attacking one innocent civilian or a group of innocent civilians, the terrorist can spread feelings of fear and force those in power to enact the desired political change. This is why the harm caused must be severe. Imagine, for example, that the ELF, instead of burning down buildings and causing significant property damage, broke into the houses of CEOs of major lumber companies and rearranged their sock drawers. This undoubtedly would be irritating, but it wouldn't really be the sort of action that incites widespread terror. As such, the severe property damage caused by the ELF would seem to fit this part of the definition. It is also this aspect of terrorism which explains why it is common to think that terrorism is always, or at least almost always, morally wrong. Perhaps we can imagine an extreme circumstance where terrorism would be warranted as the last resort in a necessary fight against some extreme injustice, although even this claim will be controversial. However, generally speaking, we see terrorism as wrong because even if the political cause in question is righteous, terrorism aims to further that cause by harming the lives and well-being of innocent people. It is this commitment to protect the innocent, then, which explains our moral unease about terrorism, even in those situations where violence is being used in the service of a just cause.